Riverside and also affiliated scientists with the Euro-Mediterranean Center on Climate Change, and also RFF-CMCC, European Institute for Economics and Environment. And a few fun facts about Professor Guo. She actually graduated from UC Berkeley from the Department of Agriculture and Resource Economics. And also Professor Guo is my old friend and also classmate from undergrad. So we both graduated from mathematics at Peking University. Yeah, 2015. Yeah. And Professor Guo's research centers around environmental economics and policy with a focus on climate adaptation, natural disaster management, public finance, and urban planning. So without further delay, let's welcome Professor Guo. The floor is yours.
Thank you much, yeah, for the wonderful introduction. I didn't expect such a long introduction, and introduction. I was like, yeah, that's super fancy. Like, yeah, I graduated from Berkeley 2023, and then basically I went to Europe and worked for the European Union for 2 years, and that's why I have 2 affiliations with the European Institute. And I came back to Riverside, and now kind of focus on public policy because my area is more on disaster policy. I have economic background. Yeah, so for this project, so it's still in a very early stage. So feel free to interrupt me at any time if you have any questions, discussions. So this paper actually belongs to a serious project where we look at like disasters in general, not just wildfire, but also like infrastructure and property construction, also in general. So for this paper per se, it is on how wildfire trigger any green building or green technology investment in the building sector. And this is a collaboration with a rather kind of interdisciplinary team, but we are also for scientists, but we focus on different aspects. And also with Shuo, who is also here, and she is my kind of PhD peer from UC Berkeley, the same program, and she is graduating this year. So she's here to address some questions, and also because I updated this paper recently, so she's also here to see what is the most current stage of the paper. So, all right, so for the motivation, if I this is recorded. All right, so I believe it needs no introduction, especially to California audience, about the escalating risk of wildfire, kind of especially in the past decade. And the thinking about wildfire as a very destructive shock that can damage infrastructure, properties, and it's going to trigger a reconstruction process afterwards, which is necessary processes recovery. And then there could be 2 pathways about how cities or homeowners of the damaged properties, how they rebuild afterwards. So one way is just to recover exactly back to pre-disaster condition, and we call this a reactive pathway of rebuilding. Or they could take this opportunity because the home is already burned, so it has to be rebuilt anyway. So this could be a window of reconstruction, and at the same time to incorporate some other green technologies or just fully rebuild the building as a green building, like with higher efficiency or more resilience with future risks. We call such kind of reconstruction a proactive reconstruction, which is basically to integrate more green technology and make some improvement on top of the pre-disaster condition. And such kind of proactive adaptation can also happen for the properties not directly damaged by the wildfire, especially wildfires, very extreme climate events. It can also make people more aware of climate risks. And as a result, this public awareness of climate change will make more people to care more about climate change, and they may want to adopt more kind of sustainable or green technologies in other sectors. So this kind of risk savings channel can not only affect the damaged areas, but can also spill over to other undamaged but exposed areas to fire. So kind of this paper, we are trying to study this empirical question about how California cities rebuild after wildfire. Do they take more of the reactive channel just restoring back to the pre-disaster condition, or they also consider some green technology and rebuild the damaged properties in a more proactive way. So this is more of an empirical question about which channel is stronger. So if we look into the literature, not only for wildfire, but for more general climate disasters, kind of hurricane, storm, earthquake, then the evidence is very mixed. So some economic studies focus on the industry of construction because disaster can trigger a lot of economic disruption. It's going to necessitate some recovery, reconstruction, and this is going to stimulate the growth of the construction industry. And this results because the construction industry become more promoted, and then the infrastructure and home improvement is going to be stimulated. So this is like a positive channel, and through the information channel, because disaster, extreme events like wildfire make people more aware of climate risks. So people are gonna kind of consider adopt more sustainable technology. So this is going to promote the green investment in general. But at the same time, so disaster can cause a lot of financial losses and constrain the available resources for recovery process. So this is going to slow down a lot of economic behaviors and include the R&D and innovation sector as well. So there are some findings that show that disaster can disrupt not only the general innovation, but also green technology innovation, just because there are less resources available to conduct innovation work. So there are mixed evidence. But not a single paper focused on wildfire and focused on California cities. So this is our research question, which is about whether and how California cities rebuild and invest more sustainably after wildfire. Many mechanisms can work here. While there's disruption, many properties were burned and they require construction. But it can be a creative window to not only rebuild, to recover back to the pre-disaster condition, but also incorporate some other green building, and just make the new building more sustainable and resilient for future risks. But at the same time, disaster can cause economic disruption to reduce resources and money available for recovery. And also many green technologies are very costly. So for the affected homeowners, they may not have enough money just to rebuild back to the disaster situation, not to mention that they will not consider some green technology integration. Some policy, this is my favorite part. So some policy in California also constrain about how people can rebuild after a disaster shock. So California, we have a specific property tax policy, which is called Proposition 13. Basically, if there are any new house transactions or any renovation, reconstruction, then the property tax is going to update it towards the current market value. So let's say that if my house is bought by my grandparents 50 years ago, where the property value was pretty low, then likely today I still pay very low taxes because I still enjoy the market value 50 years ago during the purchase time. But if there's a wildfire damage my property, I'm going to repair my property, I'm going to rebuild, or I'm going to sell my damaged property, buy a new property somewhere else, then I'm going to update my property tax to the current value. So kind of if there's some new reconstruction work, this is going to increase the property tax. But at the same time, California has a policy called Section 170, which basically says that if there are some disaster or some losses, and if I just rebuild my property back to the pre-disaster situation, this is going to retain my grandparents' property tax. So this is going to encourage the recovery, the reactive recovery, just back to the pre-disaster situation, not adding any kind of sustainability improvements. So this is the policy constraint specific in California that reduces new technology adoption. If finally, risk updating channel, as I said, that disaster can make people more aware of climate risks, and the result is to motivate adoption of technology in general for climate mitigation and adaptation. So many mechanisms can play a role here. We're not gonna differentiate between these mechanisms. We're gonna answer this empirical question about whether they're more reactive recovery, rebuild, or they're more proactive construction with more green buildings or with more green investments. Are there any questions before jumping into details? Very good. Yes?
How are we defining California cities?
Great question. So, well, different social scientists have different definitions.
Oh, that's why I'm asking.
Yeah. So now we're using the census definition of the place level. So basically, like a single town, single village, but also metropolitan area. I believe that they're separately defined as city, but there could be some overlap.
I guess I'm curious because a lot of my questions are going to be, especially from the Southern California context, it can be a very messy administrative system, and the fires will impact Southern California in unusual ways. Like you can have a major fire, but it only affects one tiny little mountain town with 100 people. So the fire is huge, but the economic impact and the people impacted is relatively small. But then on the other hand, you can have 10 miles away, there can be a Palisades fire that causes billions in damage. So, and which cities are in charge and how they're setting that up varies quite. Like, is it LA County or not LA County? It depends, because where the fires hit, really often have to go through those.
Yeah, so that's a good question. So we had different discussions in the beginning about what jurisdiction, jurisdiction or geography level we should look at. So kind of the finest level we can go is like census block or zip code. Yeah, but here, because we're thinking that there are some government finance problems, because really kind of, if there's a big fire, there could be some federal level money or California state level money, and this money are given to the city level jurisdiction, not to the zip code, because zip code is not jurisdiction. The city is the jurisdiction that manages money. So that's why we decided to go with money. Well, county is responsible for like property assessment, property tax, but with kind of allocating disaster aid, they usually go to finer, like lower level government. We had this discussion and we decided like city is a good context for kind of our policy background with kind of distributing disaster money. But for sure, there could be some, like many cities are bigger, some are smaller, right? Some cities are more exposed to fire and
the last question that I would have, which is sort of related, is I'm curious. I know it's totally fine, but if and how you consider the different socioeconomic status of the impacted communities. Again, there's a big impact between well-off people in Pacific Palisades losing their house and working class people not like outside of big families. I guess they're not the same. They're not.
So two considerations. One is control and the other is to be done. So what is control? Definitely, we use a regression model. So we have some socioeconomic controls, which is try to control some differentiations between different cities, which could interact with their capability of recovery, or they're about to control them. But at the same time, there could be some heterogeneity, like the problem, because we're looking at when there's a damage, how different cities they build green buildings afterwards. So this impact itself could be heterogeneous across cities of different economic status. So this is to be done. Definitely, kind of in the future, we're gonna study this heterogeneity effect, but so far we don't have any results. But this is
Thank you. Sorry for taking up the time.
Any more questions? Right. As a context, California cities, and that doesn't caveat, but we consider many different jurisdiction level, and we think the city is probably the best for our context. And the picture is not very high resolution. So it could be like vague. But basically this is the map of at the city level. So many natural places, they're roofs and they do not belong to any city. 90% of California cities are not exposed to fire at all. But for the other exposed cities, some are very exposed to wildfire damage. So basically here, this darkened red color, this accounts for about 3% of California cities, and these cities have more than 25% of their properties exposed to fire damage. So basically 1/4 of the population there are exposed to fire. Yes?
Is this representing the possibility of danger or explicitly things that have happened in the past?
It represents the history. It's not from a projection. It represents. So here to draw this map, basically exposure, we use burn area. So it's the historical fire perimeter. We have location of all properties. We just compute how many properties are within a historical fire. But for historical fire, we consider the past 20 years from year 2000. So we believe that this, so California did not have a very developed fire mapping that is, agreed by everyone. It's different from hurricane. Like hurricane, the FEMA hosted the special flood hazard area, which is kind of a well-recognized mapping of hurricane risk profile. We don't have similar mapping in California, so that's why we use historical exposure areas to define this. Do you have better suggestion for some model? I mean that different engineers, different thought. We are social scientists. We have no idea what is the best model for fire prediction.
I'm not going to put anybody around me on that. There are a couple people in our lab who are explicitly fire spread in California.
Right. Yeah, we have some thoughts on that, but it's because we are a group of social scientists. Yeah, definitely we can talk about that further.
Yeah.
Yeah, so kind of some facts. The wildfire losses are huge, account for 1.5% of GDP. Impact is disproportionate, probably corresponds to earlier question, and it's not equitable. More impacts fall on low incomes and vulnerable groups. And so this is why wildfire is so interesting, different from other kind of hurricanes or storm flood that are also prominent in the U.S. So if you look at the damage data of different disasters, so basically for wildfire, we're going to see the majority of affected properties that were completely burned. They all suffer substantial damage, and the only choice is either to move away from the original place or to rebuild from quite substantial construction. This is so different from hurricane. For hurricane, we also studied similar questions before and find that after hurricane disaster, basically the affected properties, the majority of them are only minorly flooded. They were flooded by the water, but afterwards, when the water is clear, they're good to go. This is different from wildfire. For wildfire, the majority of affected properties need to be rebuilt. So this is why this could be a great opportunity to conduct some proactive construction work. So now I'm gonna jump into data. So wildfire, we do data sets. One is the damage data. This is from the GEANS data. If anyone is familiar with that, that's basically structure level inspection data, the CAL FIRE, which is the Fire Department of California. They send out on-site inspector after a big fire, just to inspect every single property within 100 meters of the fire boundary and see how large is the damage. I talked with Michael this morning because he used to work with the data. So basically, there was some kind of base area. We have no idea about how this percentage was calculated, but people all agree that basically if a property gets burned, there's nothing left. It belongs to destroyed group, and that is kind of the vast majority of the affected property. And basically use this data to categorize all these 4 categories from affected to destroyed as damage. And then we also have fire perimeter. So if you combine fire damage with fire perimeter, you're going to find some properties that are within the fire boundary but are not damaged. And then we define those properties as exposure. So basically, they probably see a small fire in their backyard. They're aware of the fire, but they do not suffer from any actual damage. So we define this as exposure. Right. Then we're going to differentiate between the damage properties versus the properties that were exposed to fire but did not suffer from any actual damage. So this allows us to differentiate between actual fire damage versus fire exposure. And then some of our data come from the green investment in the building sector. So basically some buildings are labeled as green buildings, so they're qualified for some tax credit. There are some government sector provide such a certification. But before that, we want to understand what is the general construction activity, and we use the building permits data. So if I'm going to present this in front of some policy scholars, there are a lot of questions about many construction activities are unpermitted. There's a lot to do with property tax, but basically this is the best data that we can have to measure what are the general construction activities. And then we can differentiate and we're going to categorize the building permits into three groups. They're overlapping. There are new construction, and then renovation. And recovery is related with some post-disaster repairs. And then green building, we have two measures. The first is the LEED building, which is a certification provided by a federal government called the U.S. Green Building Council. This is a very comprehensive certification that considers six categories. The primary category is energy efficiency, and then it also has a lot to do with water efficiency, whether the property uses any sustainable material, the indoor environmental quality, whether the side of the property is in a kind of sustainable side. And also, if there are some other innovation and sustainable innovation that's not considered in the first five categories. So LEED building is usually take a rather long review process and it's quite complicated. So most applicants to get a LEED building certification is the new building. So basically, it's developed from nothing, and then they apply to get a certification for LEED building. And then the building is a green building, and then they can get some tax credit. And we also differentiate them into the public sector, like if it's a public university, a school, or utility government building, versus if it is a private building. And the other green building measure we use is the Energy Star label. So if you go to a store to buy some appliances, probably we're going to see this label on some appliances of Energy Star, which basically is on energy efficiency. And the Energy Star label can also be awarded to buildings, and this review process is rather speedy, and the tax benefit is not as large as the LEED building. So if there are some green renovation to existing building stock, which improves the energy efficiency, the building owner usually goes for the Energy Star. So in practice, Energy Star is usually rewarded to the renovation work on top of the existing building stock. So that's why we use two different measures for green building. One is for new green building construction, and the other is more of the green renovation. All right, so we differentiate between where is the green building. So we use the historical fire area to define the fire zone. So basically, fire zone is the areas exposed to fire since year 2000. And then we really look into the location of each green building, whether they're inside the fire zone or outside the fire zone. It's very interesting. Later on, we're going to see from the data that the vast majority of the green buildings are outside the fire zone. This is very reasonable. Like green buildings, they are more expensive to build, so they want to be built in a safer place, which is outside the fire zone. And then we also consider some other green technology in building sector. So here we consider the EV charging infrastructure and also solar panels. Why they're also interesting? That's because to build an EV charger or to build a solar panel, it does not need to be a full recovery or a full reconstruction of the property. So if people want to build EV charger or PV system, it can happen anytime. So it does not need to be an opportunity after disaster when people need to rebuild their property anyway. This would happen anytime. So we think this would be measures of more general green technology adoption. So we think these are also like proactive responses after a fire, but this has less linkage with kind of reconstruction or recovery process. All right, any questions so far with the data sources? All right, so then I'm going to look at some statistics of the data. So basically, for all the data, we aggregate them to the city level for each year. So here is a city by year panel. All this measure is for each city each year. For fire, what you can find here is like different damage level. I think majority of the properties are fully destroyed. So basically, California, an average city, there is like about 1.8 property fully destroyed by fire. So this is not a big number, but just to consider the fact that 90% of cities are not exposed to fire at all. So we have a lot of zeros here. So this is reducing, like, for some cities, they can suffer from like more than 10K properties fully destroyed in some years. All right, so we then compute like what percentage of properties were damaged, and then on average, about 1.5% of properties were damaged in a California city per year, and only about 0.1% of properties were exposed but not damaged. So this makes kind of wildfire disasters so different from other hurricane or flood, because when we study hurricane, you're going to find that the majority of properties were either affected or minor damage. Only a few properties were fully destroyed. A lot of properties were exposed but not damaged because they were flooded by some water level, but they're not actual damage. But here with wildfire, so different. When there's a fire, when people see a fire, then very likely the property gets some damage. All right, so that was building permits. This represents all building behaviors. And what we see here, basically, the magnitude is that about tens or hundreds of kind of each city each year, they see about tens or hundreds of new constructions or renovation works. So keep in mind this magnitude. And then with spring building, we only see about 1 or 2. So on average, California city only see 1 new green building per year, or 2 green renovations per year. And yes?
I'm so sorry. How are you doing your averaging for the mean?
Are you talking about population weight or something about that?
Kind of, yeah. 1.5. I'm confused about 1.5 houses per city, you said?
So 1.5, if you're referring to this number, this percentage, so basically for each city, we compute every year how many percentage of the properties were damaged. And then we just do a very simple average of all this percentage.
Per city.
Per city.
So, but a lot of these are like 100%. Or the two that are percentages have 100% here. So the standard deviation feels off because surely the number of houses per city changes dramatically.
Not really. If I remember correctly, a lot of cities have zeros. Well, there are very few cities they have 100. But like Paradise Town, like back to 2018, the whole city were exposed to fire. So we're talking about standard deviation here. It's so large.
I guess, yeah. It feels having a mean here feels strange, right? Because it should be biodome, right? Like you have either no house destroyed or a lot of houses destroyed.
Exactly.
So the mean kind of just sits over here because the mean for this mode over here is much higher than the mean for this mode over here.
Right.
Population.
Yeah, you're right. We have a lot of zero, but probably one. We have like a small percentage here, but yeah, if we're talking about the standard deviation, I was also kind of confused when I was just looking at that now, but I'm definitely gonna look into that. But yeah, given with the why there are only 1.5% is because we have a lot of zeros in the data.
Yeah.
Alright, so yeah, very few green buildings, like what is all the new building permits, only 1% of them are green buildings or green renovations. And then for these new green buildings or green renovations, the vast majority are out of the fire zone. So just compare the two means, like they're the same. So basically, all these new green buildings or green renovations, they're not inside the fire zone. They're outside fire zone. This is reasonable because to build something green and people need to invest a lot of money, so they want to choose some safer places. And the majority of the buildings, they are private buildings. So few of them, this is about one quarter, yeah, like 20%. This is like less than 10%. They're public sectors. Yes.
Sorry, just one more question.
Mhm.
Is there a geographic distribution that we should be thinking about here? Like, oh, the ones that were burned down were in the mountains, or they were in the hills?
We do have some maps here, so let me see that.
I remember the map that you had.
Yeah, so it should work for the button. So this is the wildfire damage, wildfire exposure.
Yeah.
And then these are the green buildings, and so this is the lead building, and this now this is the new green building, but these are all construction work. The left figure and the right figure is the EV charger.
Well, should we take it that the green buildings are being built in places that are technically safer than for fire, or they're instead being motivated by the fact they're just building in the middle of the city rather than closer to the wall and urban interface?
So I believe if you look at this geographical distribution, so definitely some economic hub like Bay Area and South California, there are more green buildings because they are urban area. I think that's reasonable. But what I talk about, whether the buildings located inside fire zone, outside fire zone, that's basically many fire zones that are wall and urban interfaces. You can think that's a suburban area. So many green buildings are outside the suburban areas, so probably in the center of the city. But we don't differentiate between suburban or downtown. The only differentiation we have is inside fire, outside fire. So definitely there's a correlation with the downtown area, but I only use kind of their outside fire zone because that's a kind of better story that's more linked with what we want to say here.
Okay.
Yeah. All right, so let me go back to reward. Yeah, of course.
Just there's sort of a lot of categories.
Of course.
Do you consider it a neighborhood one or just
Yeah, so I think they are definitely categorized because there are 6 criteria and they're gonna put together a score, and then I think they have like gold level, I think, or diamond, gold, silver. So they have some categories. We have that data, but so far we didn't look into that. So we'll probably do so in the future, but so far I don't have results yet.
As I was mentioning, it's not like some we, because I used to be in this industry, some
Cool.
certificate their object, their certificate is different. Like some is the certificate in like the huge commercial building, like this is like and some are certificate for the whole neighborhood.
Oh,
Like all of the buildings together is like a lead neighborhood, and it can also be submitted for like gold, diamond, or
Oh,
different,
really?
like, together.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if you just split the building or you combine, because I think they're like 4 or 5, like those category, like different like, objects.
Yeah, I wasn't aware of like a neighborhood could be certified as a lead neighborhood. So I think probably the data we use is kind of as the building. It's just that we know the exact location of the building and we have the lot long of the building. I think probably because our data is just for the buildings. But that's a very good point because I wasn't aware that the neighborhood, lead neighborhood. Yeah, I think I'm gonna look into that. But yeah, I think that's a very good point. Thank you. And then I need to look into that because for the data we have, I think for the lead building we have from relevant to the most up to date. So I'm gonna look into the data, but also I'm gonna look into the neighborhood. That's a very good point. Thank you. So then, also the same with EV and PV. So basically, majority of these installations happen outside fire zone, the safer area. We are data because we focus on more of the residential or more of the residential EV or PV. We can see that our data is highly skewed towards residential versus commercial. This is not a fact. This is because our data is like for the PV, we focus on the light capabilities, and that's why our data is more on the residential side. Also, for the model, it is quite a simple model. We are social scientists. It's just a regression. We want to test when there's a fire last year. In the current year, do we see more green buildings? So this is something we want to test. So the main consequence variable on the left is the count of building permits or green buildings or EV installation or solar panel installation. And then the independent variables of interest is the number, so the share of properties damaged by fire in the previous year, or the share of properties undamaged to fire but exposed to fire in the 1 year left. This is a Poisson fixed effect model. We have some socioeconomic controls, income, population, race, composition, employment rate. We have some fixed effect controls like city and then country by year level to control for some macroeconomic dynamics. And we also have a dynamic model because for this basal model, we only consider 1 year lag. Basically, there is a fire last year. What is the fact today? But there could be some longer-term effect. Let's say there's a fire 5 years ago, but still we are suffering from some financial losses, resources constrained. So if I could retain even to a couple of years later. So here we expand the baseline model into a distributed lag model, and then we consider the effect of the current year to 5 years later. So these are the two models. Yes.
When you consider climate change conditions, because increasing drought in places that were not fire before,
This is a good question. So yeah, I think kind of the controversy here is that if we want to use a simplified model like this, we're going to claim that fire is fully exogenous. Like what area? So some cities are definitely more risky to fire, but when is the fire? What properties are burned? These are completely exogenous. If we claim that, we're going to use very light model. We're not going to control any climate variables. And if we control climate variables, so basically underlying assumption is that the fire is not fully exogenous, then there could be concern that why do you only control for temperature? Why do you only control for precipitation? You should control for more. So on the either side, there are some caveats. So we decided to go with the simple one. Probably because we studied hurricane a lot before, and for hurricane makes similar assumption that many coastal areas are more exposed to flood, but what communities exactly are flooded and when is the time of the flood? That's exogenous, and that is the kind of the identification we are using. So we're trying to make similar assumption here. We hope we'll be fine with the review process, but yeah, thank you for that. I mean, this is kind of concern on both sides.
So what's the reason of using a log linear model?
It's not a log linear model. So because we use a Poisson model. And
so what's the Poisson model? So Poisson means you're thinking about the probability of failure for every house. So okay.
So kind of the reason we use Poisson model is that because our dependent variable is count variable. So the only option we have is either a log or postone, but because this is a count variable, postone is more appropriate. And then how to interpret the coefficient from postone model, so it should be interpreted in a similar way to the log linear model. So that's why we write this for log. But yeah, I could also remove the log, but I need to say that how do we interpret the coefficient? You just interpret it similar as a log, so kind of 1% change relative to what 1% change.
So your two-way fixed effect, the second fixed effect is also county specific.
So we use city fixed effect and also county by year.
County by year fixed
So
effect.
two-way fixed effect should be city plus year.
Plus year, yes.
Yes.
So for the second one, it's not just year, it's also the county part.
That's because many counties have their specific policy. Whether you control for county, that's because we use a lot of analysis with property tax, property assessment, like that. And with that, in that different counties, they have different implementations. So that has a lot to do with their kind of revenue. So that's a standard for us, but I believe we only control for city plus year, the result should be quite similar. Yeah, but thank you for that. All right, so I'm going to jump into the results. The first step, when there's a fire last year, what is the consequence on construction behavior? General construction, not stream building. And this is very reasonable, like when there's a fire damage last year, there's increases in the number of new constructions, renovations, and recovery activities this year. This is because of the houses are damaged and they need to be rebuilt. And then when their houses are damaged but exposed to fire, well, these properties were not damaged at all, so they do not trigger any reconstruction. This is exactly what we see here. So these are great. And dynamics, basically, all the effects are very shorter. So when there's a fire last year, there are going to be more construction this year, some leftovers to be done next year, but afterwards recovery is finished, so we don't see any effects after year 3. This is also good. And then green building, this is something we really like. So basically, when there are more damaged properties by fire last year, we're going to see more green building this year. This green building registration is not the finish of the green building. Basically, they just apply for the green building certification. And then, as I mentioned, majority of the green building are outside fire. And we also see that most of the positive effect also happens outside fire. So this is, we really like this. This basically says that, well, if my city, there are some wildfire damage, it triggers some recovery, well, we see more new green buildings, but they were not rebuilt on those damaged areas. They were built somewhere else. So this is more like adaptation to build resilient for future disaster. Alright, so for exposure, basically nothing. They can find there are some positive effects with public buildings, but public green buildings that are kind of just 20% of all green buildings. We're going to say this is very minimal effect. Dynamic, this is also interesting. So for the 1-year lag effect, basically for positive findings here, right? So basically, that there's a fire last year, there are going to be more green building construction this year. But over the longer term, we find that this effect, turn over to the negative. So this has a lot to do with, we believe this has a lot to do with the financial strains over the longer term. So basically, after fire, the city suffers from some financial losses. So probably they're going to rebuild. So they choose to rebuild in a safer places with green building. But when the recovery process is finished, then to do more green building, there has to be additional money, and the city lack that money because of the disaster losses. So over the longer term, you see less green building over the longer term after fire. Questions?
Sorry, I'm so sorry. What are the axes here?
What are
the axes on these 3 graphs?
These are the number of years after fire.
No, the y-axis.
The y-axis is the estimate, the coefficient of. This is for all leads buildings, and this is the number of buildings outside fire, and this is inside fire. Inside is very small number.
So this is the percent of buildings being built that are green, or
So this is that you should interpret it as if there 1% more damage last year, and how large is the. So basically, the cost variable should be interpreted as percentage.
percentage of what?
Percentage of green building prices. So basically here is that if there 1% damage in the fire last year, and then if we see this as 0.5, this basically means that the lead building registration increases by 0.5%.
0.5.
Right. Alright.
So did you include control variables about, like, for example, policy and subsidy changes that might lead to new
Yeah, that's a great question. So we tried, so we have a sphere project we're focused on hurricane, and in that project we control for the green building policy explicitly. But here, I forgot why we didn't control for that. But for other policies, that's the reason why we control for the county by year fixed effect, because we believe many policies are based on the county level.
But does incorporating fixed effect of county year like fully subsume the control for the?
We're gonna claim that. So we're gonna claim that all the policies relevant, let's say the government revenue is on the county level, or the county by year. So we are gonna not look into any city specific policy. There's a similar findings with Energy Star, which reflect the green renovations to the existing buildings, so positive effect. Or I think to interpret the 1% increase on damage, I think this should be multiplied by 100 to, if I remember, this is not linear. So basically, I'm confused here. It should be interpreted like 1% increase in the damage property is going to generate 3.5% increase in Energy Star certification. So yeah, I think this should be interpreted by multiplying 100, but I'm going to look into that, double check. I think it should multiply with 100. But yeah, kind of the basic story is the same, that when there are more wildfire damage in the past, it's going to trigger more green renovations. Most of the renovations are with outside the fire zone, so relatively safer places, and it's only a short-term effect. So here you can see only 1 year lag has a positive effect, and afterwards the effect goes down to 0. Alright, so for EV charger and PV, so EV we found a positive effect. So basically, when there's a fire damage in the past year, next year you're going to see more EV installation, not only outside fire, but also inside fire, basically everywhere. So we want to interpret this as the increased perception for climate risk. So people generally want to adopt more EV. And also the effect is quite short-lived. It's not a long-term effect. And a different finding for PV, for solar panels, we find negative effect. So basically, when there's a fire last year with some damage, we're going to see less solar panel installation this year. And it's also short-lived. But why is a negative effect? We try to make an explanation, and the best explanation we can come up with is that solar panels require more financial investment, and probably because of the wildfire damage generating losses, people can no longer afford to install a PV system. Well, EV charging is also costly, but the cost is generally lower relative to a whole rooftop solar panel system. Yes?
How many EV chargers were built in fire zones?
There are some.
What are the numbers I should?
I mean, they're still very few. Like the average city can see about 5 EV charging installation, and and majority of them, so comparing this to number, majority of them are outside fires.
So how should we interpret the confidence interval of the in-fire graph?
So I feel like they should multiply with 100. So basically, if let's go back to EV. So 1% damage last year is going to increase EV installation by 1.5% this year.
Right, but your confidence interval for the in-fire is really, really thin. If you have
all right. Yeah, so yeah, I didn't think about that because I basically ignore it because I claim that the majority of installation are outside fire. So but yeah, I'm gonna look into that. That's something we need to address. So PV, we finished this. So yeah, that's basically everything. And yeah, the main message is that Wildfire can create a rebuilding window for green technology adoption, but in fact it's not longer term. Well, temporarily it can boost the green building construction and some technology adoption, and they're concentrated in safer places. So they are triggered by fire, but they are not just rebuilt in the fire zone. They're in relatively safer areas. But over the longer term, we see reduced green investments, especially with Energy Star, and that's probably due to the financial strain generated by the fire losses. And if we only have wildfire exposure without any real damage, this is so different from hurricane. We do not see any triggers on the green building adoption. So the key challenge for policymakers, this is something that we policy school really like to make. So the key message I provide here is that how to transform the short life stimulation effect into a longer term effect. So probably something to consider is to use some building codes or support the financing options to build green constructions, which can probably help to boost the longer term resilience upgrades. So yeah, that's everything I think for this, and thank y'all for your questions. Are there any last minute questions? Or you can reach out to me individually. But thank y'all for your time and attention. Yeah, there are a lot of questions during my presentation. Thank y'all for that.
I have a quick question. Did you do the power trend assumption test?
So, why didn't we do that? Oh, right, because we don't have a different depth.
Oh, okay.
Right. Yeah, so because wildfire, we have multiple treatment.
Okay. Any other question? Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
You want to say something?
Right.
No, I'm so sorry. I'm a little bit confused. Because I must have missed it. I'm so sorry. Years after wildfire, what wildfire are we talking about?
We're talking about all wildfire. So we're basically talking about major wildfire with more than 100 acres burned.
Right, but you're talking about like years after a wildfire. How much are the green buildings going to go up and down? Like what?
Right. So yes, I think the main. So fact with wildfires that there are not a lot of inhabitant, like fire area. If you're talking about big fire, so
you're talking about fire burns a city. Now we're going to look at the increase in green, like all this stuff in just this zone. We're not looking at percentages overall in California. We're just looking at. So when you say outside of the fire zone, what do you mean by that? Like
so basically for a city, so basically we're looking at if there's a property damage from fire in that city, and then we're gonna divide the city into fire zone and outside fire zone, because fire zone we have like it for entire California, and then we're gonna count how many green buildings inside the fire zone within that city.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if you use this, but I don't. From the planning world, we often talk about wicked problems. This very much feels like one of them. I guess kind of related to my earlier questions. I wonder if you would have any large recommendations of what like the state of California could be doing, like for the next next governor, is there anything that you could recommend? I'm especially worried from the wicked problem perspective because kind of the results that you're showing aren't a surprise, but they make sense in light of it just being a very messy political environment. I'm saying this, I'm coming from back east, so the natural disasters we have there are much more flooding-based than fire-based, but you see a lot of societally undesirable outcomes. What'll basically happen there is all of the rich people who have second homes on the beach are 100% fine. And they're actually, but it's bad. So then we have like FEMA funding going directly to them to save their beaches and rebuild their homes, but say lower lying non-beachfront communities in working class areas that also get flooded are just 100% screwed and they get nothing. And so I'm curious how you can because we know you're going to see differences in how different communities, not only based on where they are, but based on what town they're a part of, based on is it vacation, is it owners, how much political power do they have, etc., are going to respond to wildfires differently.
I actually have a very long answer to that. So anyone for sure you can't to go. But what I was just thinking about when you were talking about the question is about California property tax policies, because California has a very special property tax policy, like proposition.
Yes, generational theft, I'm aware.
Yeah, of course. And then about yeah, but then when there's a reconstruction, this is really going to trigger a reassessment of the property tax. So that's why many like ADUs were unpermitted in California. They just build it, but they do not get a permit for that. And then when there's a fire, for people to avoid any property tax increase, the best way is to just recover back through the pre-disaster situation. So with this policy, it's pretty hard to make any resilience.
That makes a lot of sense.
Right.
Do you have any thoughts on the fire insurance as well? Because we also know if you're more well off, the odds of you having fire insurance goes down quite a bit because you won't need it for your mortgage, and it just doesn't make financial sense to have fire insurance on your $10 million beachfront home.
Right. And the insurance is so different, like with fire relative with hurricane. With hurricane, there's the NFIP, which is a federal, founded insurance program. And then insurance can make a lot of difference because people usually lack money to make this recovery effort. They apply for disaster A, but this really paid like a reimbursement afterwards. So insurance is really the first money that people damaged home they can get to cover their recovery. But wildfire insurance is provided by a private market, like right before Los Angeles wildfire, even for last year, many insurance companies they step out of the market.
But it is required for most new home buyers.
Right.
If you're going to need a mortgage, you need some type of fire insurance.
Right. But still, there are many bad reputations with wildfire insurance relative to the FEMA provided insurance.
No, that's okay. Is there anything that California you think could do with respect to wildfire insurance that would encourage more of a long-term green transition?
So I would say the best suggestion is just to copy like what we have with the hurricane insurance. The state government you step in and provide some state-founded insurance. So this could be like more of a trust to the mortgage, the home buyers. Another new policy, Proposition 19, which is passed 2021, is basically, when there's a fire that damaged my house, there's some tax relief. Like there used to be some their own policy. If a fire new within the same county after fire damage, I can really transfer my tax, low tax to new property if the new property is not, luxury, relatively bigger relative to the previous property. This was only within county transfer. And the Proposition 19 expand that to the entire California. So basically, if I have a house in Riverside get burned and then I'm going to buy this a safer place, Bay Area, if it is the same structure, but Bay Area is much more expensive, I'm going to transfer my low property tax from Riverside to Bay Area. This is passed by Proposition 19, 2021. We believe this is a good policy that can stimulate some.
Don't lump us into we.
All right.
Or me. I can't.
Yeah, but there are some new policies. I think this is a very interesting area with a lot of policy changes, but insurance
Insurance, but yeah.
Okay, so let us thank our speaker.